1, 2, 3, 4.
We like jamming. That's what we do. Hi everyone, welcome. We're grateful that you're here. We're grateful that you want to work and invest in your skill as a guitar player, serve your church. That is a wonderful thing. If you don't know us, my name is Ben Slee. I am the music pastor at Christchurch Mayfair, which is where we're sitting right now, as it happens. You're Phil.
I am, yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Phil Short, if you don't know me, and I'm a member of the church here. I've been a member of the church here for about 12 years, I think, long time. I'm a professional guitar player by trade. I've been playing now, I think, 22 or 23 years, and I've been playing in a professional capacity for about 10 or 11 of those, I think, something like that. So very much looking forward to sharing the things that I've learned from lots of other people today, and hopefully they will be useful to you guys as well.
Yeah, I reckon it will be. And you won't see him unless it goes horribly wrong, but at the back we have Dave Aykroyd, who's also a member of this church, who is very generous and gifted, and he's brought along some tech equipment so we can do this really well. So thanks to him, and yeah, thank you for joining us. So today, we're going to be looking at just several things related to these two instruments. So we're going to be thinking about just simple, good technique that will help unlock your playing on both instruments. We're going to be thinking about and exploring the different roles that these instruments have in a church context. We're going to be thinking about how to create parts that are creative and helpful and supportive of singing. And at the end, we've left plenty of time for us to have a Q&A. So please do, all the way through as we're going through stuff, please drop in questions into the question box. There's a couple of boxes. Try not to put them in the chat one. It's just a bit harder to find them in there. But if you bring them into the question box, we'll be able to come to them at the end. There's also some handouts which will kind of navigate where we're going through all of this. And Phil's done some really great work. He's put loads of extra bonus material that you can actually use to take this on and over the next year if you wanted to. Just about, I reckon.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there, and it's brilliant. So have a look in there as well, and that's for you. So before we get down to the practical stuff, we don't have time to go deep into the kind of underlying ethos of our ministry, but it's so important just to state it up front. And everything that we're saying is driven with this as our basis. What are we doing when we play on a Sunday? Well, we are ministering God's word to God's people. That's the big thing that we're doing. That's what we're about. And everything we're saying is coming out of there. And us as instrumentalists and musicians in a group or on our own even, there's two really big things we're trying to do. We're trying to support congregational singing. We want people to sing. I know it's weird at the moment, but just generally that is what we're trying to do. Support congregational singing in the way that we play and adorn the gospel truth in ways that help people see and feel how good it is, how beautiful it is. And that's why what we play really matters, actually, because we want to support the singing and we want people to see how good the gospel is, and our playing can help that. And that's what we're about today. Shall I pray?
Yeah.
And then we'll get into some of that. Father, thank you so much for the gospel. It's such good news. Thank you so much for what John T was saying earlier about how the church is what you are doing. And thank you that we get to be part of that, and we get to be part of this building up as we serve in the music team. And we pray, Father, that all that we're going to talk through now will be helpful, and it would equip all those who are watching this to develop their playing in such a way that their churches sing better and their churches love the gospel more. And we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So let's dig straight into it then. So let's go straight into point number 2. Good technique, part 1. So the first thing we're going to think about is the concept of technical control. We're going to kind of go over some core basics, and then we're going to go into musical application a bit later. So I think good technique is just really, really helpful. It helps us get the most out of our instruments. It helps us get the most out of simple stuff. And let's be honest, most of the time we're playing generally quite simple stuff, aren't we? We're not doing anything super complicated or particularly virtuosic. But good technique is still really, really important. In the Psalms, we're commanded to play skillfully, Psalm 33, verse 1. And good technique can help us achieve that goal of adorning the gospel in a way that serves our church families. Now, I just want to say on that, I'm not saying virtuosic level or being the best in the world achieves that, but just stewarding the gifts that you've been given uniquely by the Lord to the best of your own ability. That's our aim here. So wherever we are in our journey, we're just striving to move on to our next step, whatever our next step might be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dig into some techniques. Let's think about acoustic technical focus first. So Ben, take us through some stuff about acoustic guitar.
Well, we'll start super simple. We'll start about talking how we grip the plectrum, which sounds like a really basic thing, but do you know what? I got this wrong for a long time. If I'm totally honest. Actually, Phil was someone to help me with this. So the way I'm holding the plectrum, I'm not holding it like a pen, which I think was the mistake that I was doing before. I've realised actually I was holding it like a pen. And I'll talk about the problem with that in a minute, but let me show you a better way. So if I hold the plectrum in this hand and I bring my thumb across the front of the face of the plectrum like that, the key thing about that is the amount of surface area that's underneath here. And what this means is, because I've got it gripped there tightly, I'm feeling the vibrations of the strings all the way up my arm. Now, that's really important because that's how I'm going to... getting that feedback through the strings from the pressure that I'm putting on is going to help correct problems with tone. It's going to help me bring the best out of the instrument. So it can be an easy thing to, and the mistake I've made in the past was with my incorrect hold, I wasn't getting that line of feedback through my guitar, and so when I was trying to play loud, I was kind of thrashing it, and you just lose the tone, which I won't demonstrate for you because it doesn't sound very good.
Just say what you mean by feedback, actually.
That's really helpful. So I can feel the vibration of the strings just traveling up my arm, and so I know I can feel the how firmly I need to push through the strings, how tightly I need to grip, and that helps with the tone overall of the guitar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Why would we need to think about how it feels rather than just how it sounds? Because surely I can hear how it sounds. So why is being able to hold the pick in a way that means you can feel that the transition of the vibrations from the instrument into your arm? Why is that important?
Well, for one thing, you can't always hear it, because if you're playing with other people, you can easily get lost. And I think particularly in those moments, they're the moments where I'm I'm going to play loud to match the rest of the band, which is a good thing. But if I'm doing that in a way that's just kind of thumping hard and hard on the strings, I'm going to throw it out. And actually, sound guys like Dave at the back who are sensitive and want to help the congregation sing are going to pull me down at that point, because it just gets harsh. But it's going to help. It's going to help the tone of the guitar come through properly. And again, like you said, it makes the most of the instrument. So I'm seeing the pick as an extension of my whole arm rather than something I'm holding in the end of my fingers. Now, that means we can think about the projection of the strings. The way I'm thinking about it is less about, right, I'm really going to hammer the strings to go louder, and it's much more about tightening the grip on the plectrum. So I'll keep the pick in the same position, and if I'm playing like this, it's quite a loose grip, and then I'm going to tighten up.
Wow, that's really noticeable, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, and a phrase that Phil says, which I think is great, is stop tickling the guitar. Because can you hear the difference there? So and I think when we're timid and we're nervous, we can tighten up and we kind of sound a little bit like this. I'm sort of, to use a Phil phrase, I'm tickling the guitar. But now if I tighten that up, you know, so
it's almost twice as loud, actually, isn't it?
It's twice as loud, and it sounds much more confident. And this is the key thing. When we're thinking about leadership in church, we want to give people the confidence to sing. And that's that second example where I'm gripping the plectrum properly and holding it tightly enough to project the strings and the sound that's coming through. It's going to give people confidence to sing. They're not going to feel on edge like, oh, we're not quite sure what's happening here. We know where we are.
And the nice thing with that as well is that you've got that opportunity to incorporate really successfully without changing very much, just by changing the pressure on that pick. So whether that pick is slightly loose in the fingers or whether it's more rigid is giving you that extra volume from it. And so you can be dynamically sensitive without getting that sort of clacky sound that ends up getting in the way of things. And it still sounds confident even though it's softer. And I guess we'll come back to the gears thing a bit later. Yeah,
exactly. But on the dynamic response, I mean, an acoustic guitar, it does have a sort of, we've often taught like going through different gears in terms of what the instrument can do in the band concept. I think acoustic guitar is a little bit limited in that. There's only so much you can do. I mean, if you've got sort of picking things you can do, but once you're into the strumming, it's mainly about how many subdivisions you'll play, which we'll come on to. But thrashing it harder ain't going to help necessarily, but having the grip tight, so when you want to go bigger, just tighten that grip slightly, you'll feel the vibrations to your arm and you'll know that you're there and the tone is good. And that's just serving people, that's helping people.
Brilliant, fantastic. So very similarly then, for electric guitar, we actually hold the pick in the exact same way and we feel the strings in the exact same way as well. So getting comfortable with holding the pick in that particular way. I know this sounds super basic, but if you're kind of used to holding it that way, as Ben has said, you are limited in your control. So this simple adjustment will make a huge difference. Now, the big thing that I want to talk about for electric guitar in particular is confidence with string projection. And this does kind of tie in with all the gear and things as well, but we're going to come on to gear a little bit later. But to begin with, I just want to think about string projection. Dear me, that's a mouthful, isn't it?
It's I'm glad you had that bit, not me.
Now, when we're feeling nervous, maybe we're kind of our confidence isn't quite there, and I totally get this because this has been me for sure. We'll kind of tickle the string. So let me demonstrate what I mean. So if I'm playing this C here, okay, that sounds like a relatively inoffensive sounding note, okay? But I'm being quite light with that attack. Now, if I just squeeze that pick a little bit harder, and if I just allow that right hand to fall through the string, you hear how much louder that is, how much more projection there is. Now, that's really important when you're trying to give a lead. Let's say I was going to play an introduction, so we were going to do an introduction to Behold Our God, which is our kind of study song for this workshop. And I'm going to play even just the stock opening intro, which isn't that, but something like that. Let's say it's that. Now, if I tickle that, it's not very loud. You can kind of hear there's a little bit of ringing behind there. If I was playing, I mean, I'm not using it very much overdrive at all, but even if I use a tiny little bit extra overdrive, you can kind of hear it's a little bit buzzy. The confidence isn't there, but to just simply fake that confidence almost in how you attack. Much stronger sounding. Now I can start to experiment with those dynamics. So first thing is really thinking about holding that pick. And to get that string projection, the way that I often describe this to my students is allow the natural weight of your hand to fall through the string. So you're not too hard, because you could be too hard like this. You kind of hear it's a bit too twangy, the string's slapping back on the fretboard. It's going to knock my guitar out of tune as well. So if I allow that natural weight of the hand to fall through, The other thing that's useful to think about with that, and it's the same with the acoustic strumming as well, is the trajectory of your right hand. So often in a lot of beginner students of mine, even intermediate to advanced students, something that I often regularly correct is the angle with which that hand comes down. So if the hand comes down exactly parallel with the strings, your pick ends up being at this kind of straight 90-degree angle to the strings, and it gets caught in the strings, and that can cause all sorts of problems. Feel like you get stuck, or you trip over.
Or it falls in the hole.
Or it falls in the hole. We've all done that. We've all been there. Now, if I actually use the edge of the pick here, which camera am I looking at, that one? If I use the edge of the pick, slight 45-degree angle, it will just glide over the top.
To, kind of falling backwards 45 degree.
Yes, yes, exactly, yes. And the trajectory of the hand is almost as if I'm trying to come out of the back of the guitar, if I could punch a hole through it. So that way, the natural weight of the hand is always falling into the strings in a relaxed way, and I get even weight through all the strings. So even... What I don't get is this. Where it gets stuck.
And it sounds brittle.
Yes.
And you lose the warmth.
Absolutely. So that's the first thing, thinking about that string projection. For electric players, in particular with single notes. The other final quick thing I'll say very quickly, because we will need to move on, is thinking about articulations. Okay? So articulations, by that I mean things like bending, vibrato, little slides, that kind of thing. Anything that can help make your melody sound a little bit more interesting. And again, these are not particularly difficult things to implement, but often overlooked aspects of our musicianship in relation to what we're doing. So first thing to say with bending, I think probably in a church context, in the kind of style, the pop rock kind of style, we're probably not going to use bending that much. It's very much more of a bluesy thing, and I actually annoyingly can't turn off the big ambient reverb, which is a bit annoying, but if we're kind of in church and we start kind of... stylistically, it's maybe a little bit too much. It might also be, depending on our church culture and context, a little bit too attention drawing, even though it sounds great.
Yeah, that's
So bending we're probably not going to spend too much time with, but vibrato is really, really important. And again, I know this sounds like we might be teaching to suck eggs here, but vibrato is often another thing that I regularly correct in a lot of my students, even the students that I teach at the college. One of the things that often happens with vibrato is, let's say we're going to play this C note here in our A minor pentatonic. Okay, we'll play this vibrato note, and what will happen is we'll try and shake it as fast as possible, and we'll end up pulling the note slightly sharp, and it'll be an extremely shallow sort of, not velocity, can't think of the word, but, you know, if it was a sound wave, it would look like this, you know, very, very shaky.
Amplitude.
Yes, there we go.
There you go. Word of the day.
So sometimes it'll sound...
Right.
Okay, so it's a little bit out of tune, it's not very secure sounding. So if we are going to apply vibrato, we want to think about the string as being like a rubber band. A bit like when you were a kid and you were naughty at school and you flicked them.
Did you?
I did, I know.
Did, yeah,
confession time, there you go. So I was going to flick a rubber band back at Ben for that.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, you pull it and you let go and the rubber band does the rest. It's the same with your guitar string. So I'm going to pull it and then allow my finger to follow the string to come back.
Because it wants to come back.
Exactly. And what that will do is it will allow the note to return to pitch. So it will sound in tune, which is obviously what we're aiming for. But I also want to think about the arc of that vibrato. And you can use your vibrato as a rhythmical tool as well. So often we'll just turn it on without thinking about what it's really sounding like. But let's say I could go, sorry.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, and I've used a vibrato. You could think of it as like a mini bend, I suppose. But I've used it in a rhythmical way to re-energize those two notes. Or, so that's going to give it a more interesting kind of sound. If I go very wide, I'm going to imply more of a rock style vibrato, if anyone is into rock music or into players like Eddie Van Halen. Now, for our style, in playing in church, that's probably going to be too aggressive. But being able to learn to control those different kinds of vibratos is really important. Now, to be able to do this well, what we need to do is think of our hand as kind of being a hinge. So your thumb comes on the top, but it swings like this. So regardless of what finger you're using, all of this is nice and secure here on the left hand. What I'm not doing is dropping the hand down here and trying to pull from the fingers like that.
Right. You're using your whole hand.
Exactly. And that will allow me to keep applying pressure to the note when I'm fretting it so that the note keeps sustaining. And it will also mean that I'm not going to pull the guitar around like this, which means I'm not in control of the instrument if the guitar is going like that.
Probably not, yeah.
And, there are plenty of famous guitar players out there who you see kind of, it's just to look cool.
Yeah, that's showmanship, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not really shaking the guitar to achieve the vibrato. It's just because it's part of, trying to look good on stage or whatever. But if they're at home practicing or they're demoing stuff in an interview, you're not going to see them throwing the guitar around like that because it's a waste of energy, essentially, unless you're in that performance thing. So there's a great video on YouTube, an incredible UK guitar educator called Sean Baxter. Just type that into YouTube, Sean Baxter, bending and vibrato. He's got a whole 20-minute lesson just on this. That's how crucial it is. So I encourage you to check that out, but I've spent far too long talking about that. Yeah. I think we should just skip the next bit.
Well, before we move on to fretboard knowledge, just one brief comment on just feeling the pulse. Now, particularly as acoustic guitar players, when we're doing lots of subdivisions, we need to just make sure we're constantly feeling the pulse of music. You think of it as the musical heartbeat, and if the heartbeat stops, you die. So you've said that before. I like it. I've stolen it. So what you need to do is internalize the pulse, feel it through your whole body. And I think particularly for acoustic guitar players and your strumming pattern, keep that pulse going through your right arm. Yeah, keep that constantly. So if you're playing Behold Our God, our demo song, rather than just going, you just want to keep that moving. So and in my head, I've got that sort of like a little, exactly. Yeah, that sort of thing, just in my head all the time. And that's important for both instruments, isn't it? Just keeping on that.
Or for any musician, actually.
Yeah, any musician at all. But that's probably enough on that for now. We can talk more about that
we'll
later.
Revisit that concept a little bit later on.
Yeah. So moving on to kind of more knowledge of the fretboard. So taking us deeper into sort of particularly guitar-based techniques now as well. Phil, why don't you speak into that?
Yes. Okay. So for this next section, I'm going to go through a lot of information very quickly because of the format of the session and because of time. Everything that I'm about to talk about and show on the fretboard is in all of the PDFs that you guys have got. And it's great as well, over the next month you can come back and rewatch this video again. So don't worry if you feel like it's going really, really fast. All the PDFs are there and you'll be able to go through them. So, fretboard knowledge. I think one of the most challenging things about this instrument in particular, compared to any other instrument, is just the way the notes are laid out on the guitar. There are loads of them. Essentially, we've got like 6 pianos. If you think about a piano, you've got from left to right, one set of notes. You've got that on each string.
Yeah, you can see it on the piano in one sense. You can't in the same way.
Yes, well, you kind of can, but it's just more work. It's just more hard work. Yeah. So what we can do is we can use a system to help us learn where all the notes are on the fretboard and to map them out. Now, a lot of these things might be known to some of you guys already, especially if you've been playing for a little while. You might know your major and natural minor scales. If you're a bit more advanced, maybe you're aware of things like your major scale modes. Maybe you've come across the caged pentatonic system, maybe you haven't. Okay, so I'm going to quickly kind of go through these things. So difficulty number one is, and this is why reading music is hard for guitar players, by the way, is we can play the exact same pitch in a large number of locations. Whereas on a piano, C, that pitch of C, that is where it lives. On a flute, it is where it is. Whereas on a guitar, I can play C here. I can play that exact same pitch here. I can play that exact same pitch here. I can also play it here. And I can also play it here. Okay, the tone is different, but that's the exact same pitch, right?
The tessitura, Phil.
The tessitura.
I know.
Very good.
Carry on.
It's all right. So I've gone from the 1st fret, and I've gone all the way up to the 20th fret. Okay, and that's the same sound. So when you look at a piece of music, if any of you have studied classical guitar, but where am I supposed to do it? Which is why tab is not cheating. That's why I've given you tab in the examples as well at the end of the PDF. Okay, so how can we learn where all these notes live? Okay, well, what we can do is we can use a system called the caged system, which is where we have sort of 5 basic shapes that outline different voicings or colors of the chord. And the reason why it's called the cage system is because each of those letters represents a standard grip shape in open position. So your C shape, your A shape, your G shape, your E shape, and your D shape. Okay, so we'll demonstrate this in C. So if I go from the C major shape, okay, that's a C chord. That's what everyone will hear it as, and it's a C shape. Okay, but here is an A form C shape, okay? Because let's say you didn't have a nut, that's what that shape would look like on the guitar. So we've got a C form, we've got an A form of the same chord. I've got a G form, say you had a capo on at fret 5. Then I've got an E form, and then I've got a D form, and then I'm back at the top. Okay, now what we can do with those grip shapes, because most of us, I'm sure, will be familiar with, well, where is the note name for the chord on the low strings? Okay, well, I know where C major is because I know where to put my finger for C here on the A string, or if I know my bar chords, I can find it on fret 8 of the E string. Okay, but we can also take advantage of this to help us learn where all the root notes are for that particular key using those 5 shapes. So within that chord, and I've labeled the intervals on the diagrams for you. Okay, I've got a C here, and I've got a C here. Great, okay. I've got a C here again, the same one shared, and I've got one here. So now I've learned C in 3 places. Okay, cool, so I've got those frets learned. Okay, I've got a G form. So I've got a C here, C on the low string. The top E string is mirrored, as we know. So now I've got a new section. I've also got the octave here as well. So I've got a new C. So now I've got fret 10 on the D string mapped out, and then I've got my D form C here. So I know I've got C on fret 13 of the B string. Then I'm back at the octave of my open grip shape here. So now I know I've got C at fret 15. I've got C on the G string here on fret 17. I've got C here on fret 20 of the 2 strings. Now, I've gone through that really, really fast. It'll take time to learn that. But if you do that in all keys, just thinking about the root notes, we're not even worried about, okay, what about the 5ths or the 3rds or the 7ths or any of that kind of stuff? You can learn where all the notes on the entire fretboard are. And it's really, really important to learn to be able to do that, especially on the middle strings, especially on the G and the B strings and the D strings. Usually the E string and the A string we don't have a problem with, but it's those middle strings is where we get lost. Now, this is really important for being able to play melodies, but also for being able to visualize where the chord progressions are moving to in the type of parts that are most useful to play, which we'll come on to when we get into the learning parts thing.
And even as an acoustic guitar player, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, this is how I work out where the capo goes and the kind of, you know, the shapes that are going to work in the key and all that sort of thing. So this is such a valuable thing. So yeah, have a look at these handouts and work in more detail at them. This is really worth the effort.
Yeah, it will really transform your confidence in what you're going to play. So the next thing then, it's also really important for us to learn a bit of basic music theory. Now, some of us might have done that at school. Maybe you did grade 5 theory, but you're a bit rusty on it or whatever it is. The most important and useful bit of theory to learn is to learn the concept of the harmonized major scale, which might sound like a a slightly intimidating thing. It's not too bad, but it will require a little bit of work, and it's definitely worth putting the work in. So let me go through what this is. So the harmonized major scale is sort of the most foundational part of music theory in how we create chords and how we create chord progressions. Now, there are more advanced, more complex, and more musically interesting or stylistically different ways of approaching this kind of thing, but this is what everything is based on. Everything comes back to this foundation. So we have the major scale. Okay, and for historical reasons we don't have time to go into, that has become sort of the blank canvas for everything. Everything in music is compared to that. So anything you come across is an alteration of that particular piece of musical information. And as some of you might know and remember, or you might be learning at school or have learned at school at some point or in music lessons, the formula for that major scale: tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Okay, so we have 7 notes. Now, the way that chords are built is chords are built essentially leapfrogging over every other note. So, or we call it tertiary chord building, i.e. we go to every 3rd note within the scale. So let me explain how that works. So if I want to find out how to create the C major chord, I'm going to take the C major scale. I need the beginning note, the first note, so that's note number 1. I skip out note number 2, which was D, and then I go to note number 3, which is E. So I put those 2 together. So now I'm hearing a major third. It's a major third because it comes from the major scale. Also, it sounds happy, terrible way of describing it, but there we go, that's the best that I've got. Okay, so that's the first part of the chord. If I skip note number 4 and include note number 5, I'll get the G. Sorry, that was
nice.
a B. Okay, now I've got a triad, i.e. 3 notes, the basic information that you need to hear a chord: the root, the third, and the fifth. So that's what people are talking about when they're talking about roots, thirds, fifths, sevenths. They're talking about the number of the note that comes from the scale, literally in numerical order. How far along the row does it come? Okay, so if I do that for all of the notes, it will reveal to me all of the chords in that key. So what we do, just like how I've taken the first note of the whole scale and leapfrogged over or gone up in thirds, I'm going to do that for every note in the scale, or the degrees of the scale, we call it, degrees of the scale. So if I do that same process starting on D, still using the same notes, but I'm going to pretend that this is note number 1 now, just for the sake of building the chord. So after D, we get E, so I'm going to skip that one out. The next note in the scale is F. That's going to give me a minor third, so now I'm going to have a minor sounding chord. If I skip the next note I will get will be an A. So now I will hear D, F, and A. So now I've got a D minor chord. Now if I go through that whole process for the whole key, what I'm going to get is C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then I'm going to get back to the octave. Okay, now what I want you to stamp in your minds to memory is this formula: major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Just say it round and round to yourself. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. I almost kind of hear it like a groove.
Yeah, nice.
Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Just remember that, okay? Really, really important, because that is a default blueprint for any key. It doesn't matter what key it is. It could be B flat major. It's still going to be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Just in that key, you'll get B flat major, C minor, D minor, E flat major, etc.
Yeah.
So you can quickly work out what the chords are in a key.
And that's the really key. I just sort of coming on to for both these instruments is that actually tells you that, especially if there's capos involved, and often like the music we get given isn't in the key we're going to play it in, because we're going to put the capo on to play different shapes. And actually, this will help us, and numbering the chords in the way that you've just described just really helps with that. This is why that's really fundamental as a sort of building block in when playing guitar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, should we move on to making parts, or do you want to add a couple more bits on that?
No, we've still got time.
Great. Go for it.
Yeah, let's because this bit is really useful. So
yes, it is. Great.
Where was we up to? Okay, yeah. So So what that means then is I can now have a system, as Ben was saying, for that chord numbering system. So now I can implement, rather than thinking about every single note in every key, because the guitar is very shape-driven, I can actually rely on understanding the patterns of how music fits together to be able to access the sound of those chords. So let me show you a really cool trick, okay? So if I'm in the key of C, here's C major. Okay, so C major. Okay, that's chord 1. Now, chord 4 is going to be note number 4. Now, note number 4, if the root note is on the A string, is always going to be found either directly underneath or 2 frets back on the string above. So now I can learn what the most common chord progressions look like that we use in our church music. So now I can go, okay, well, if the most common sound might be a song that goes C major, G major, A minor, F major, which is a very common chord progression, which we've all played many times for lots of different things. Rather than thinking of that as 4 separate pieces of information, now I can see that as one piece of information. It's a chord progression. And I can recognize that sound. I can know it's chord 1, chord 6. Oh, what did I play? 1, 5, didn't I?
1, 5, yeah.
So C major is chord 1, G is the 5th chord, A minor is the 6th chord, and F is the 4th chord. So now in our communication we can play, okay, well this song goes 1, 5, 6, 4. Now, with the root notes of our chords, it's enough for me to know, to remember, okay, well 1 was major because of the major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished pattern. Yep. So 1 was major, so major, minor, minor, major, major. Oh, 5 is major. I'm going to 6 next. Oh yeah, that's minor.
Yeah.
Major, minor, minor, major. Oh, 4 is major. Okay, great. So I can remember that that's what type of chord quality goes with each number.
Yeah, that's good.
And then visually on the guitar, I can see, okay, well 1 is there, 5 always goes to here, 6 always then goes up, and 4 always goes down. So it doesn't matter what key I'm in, that pattern on the fretboard will remain the same. So I've got really quick access to finding the chords in the new key. So if your band leader says it's too high, can we turn it into the key of B? Sure, no problem. I go, okay, well there's B. Okay, 1, 5, 6, 4.
Yeah.
Major, major, minor, major. Or let's say it was an awkward key like D flat. You can do the same thing. You don't have to think about the note names necessarily. I still think it's worth being able to get to a point where you know them, but you can have access to the music before before you actually maybe remember all of your keys by knowing that.
That's good.
One last one very quickly to show you. That's with the chord 1 being with the root on the A string. Chord 1 being with the root on the E string. There's 1. 5 is your power chord from playing rock. There's 5, 6, 4. And you can see that pattern between 5, 6, and 4 is the same. It's just in a different octave, right?
That's great.
So flipping it. Now, the important thing that we'll come on to in playing parts in a minute, which I'll come to after I hand back over to Ben, is for our style of playing in church, it's really, really useful for the type of guitar parts that we're going to play to be able to do that visualizing the root notes on the D string, which is not common to guitar-centric music, and that's why we have a lot of difficulty doing this, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So I'm going to hand back over to Ben.
Well, just one thing I want to say that I just found super helpful with that is when you're playing with other musicians, I mean, not all of us will be, but those of us who are, knowing that will help us to not all be playing in the same spectral space. So if your keys player is somewhere, and that's they're playing one octave, you can then draw out in a different place. You can choose also. That's just super helpful. That's what I was going to say. Anyway, okay, so let's move on to thinking about kind of making parts. And this is where we diversify a little bit more. So all this so far has applied to both instruments in all sorts of ways. We're going to look at these 2 instruments in their specific roles. So let's just talk about acoustic guitar for a moment first of all. Think of yourself as the rhythmical glue of a little ensemble or band. And these principles will be helpful if you're on your own, but particularly when you're with others, you've got to think of it that way. Now, we're all responsible for keeping in time and keeping in tune, but there's a specific thing for acoustic guitars that this is so part of our role. And I want us to think about, so going back to the internalising the pulse, we've mentioned that earlier a little bit. When we're playing with others especially, we want to make sure that we're locking in with what we've already mentioned, the groove. So by groove, I mean the one unified rhythmic idea that holds everyone together. What you don't want is for an acoustic guitar player to be playing something that's contrary to the subdivisions that are being emphasized in the rhythmic pattern, in the groove. So I think often we default to something like which is kind of okay on its own, but if your drummer is playing quite a straight, kick, snare, kick, snare, that's just going to be a mess. And so we want to be listening for that. Even if you're on your own, you want to be listening to the melody and the vocal and thinking, okay, because actually for a non-musician to hear kind of what I've just played, and if the melody is at all syncopated, it's going to be quite hard to fit in, it's going to be tricky. So we want to think about that sort of repeating rhythmic pattern, and we want to bring our guitar to complement the accents that are being emphasized in that pattern. So thinking about clear leadership, does it complement the melody? Does it complement what everyone else in the musicians are doing? So important to listen to each other, and we want to reference that core groove, that core idea in everything we're playing. Now you can vary the velocity through the strings, which I'll demonstrate in a sec, to accent those beats on the strong beats of the bass. So say you've got a straight groove, your drummer's playing a straight groove. So you've got kick, snare, kick, snare sort of thing. So I want to be doing the same thing with my pattern. So I'll be going... I'm a little bit out of tune, which is really annoying. So I'm just going to sort that out while we're chatting, because you don't want to listen to that. Having a good tuner, that's a good thing we'll talk about later.
The great thing that you did there was you were imitating the kick drum, which is the meaty sounding part of the kit, with the meaty sounding part of the guitar.
Right, yeah,
so
absolutely.
You had the low strings giving us that sense of that low end weight, and then the bright strings giving us the feel of that backbeat brightness from the snare.
Right, so if this is like brand new to you, think of your bottom three strings as your kick drum and your top three strings as their snare drum, and just listen to what the drummer's doing and go, okay, he's going up, so I'm going to go... And I've got a couple of little additional kind of flourishes in there, but the core concept is there. I'm just keeping this hand moving and internalizing the pulse. Essentially, you just got to watch out for the volume limitation when it gets really big. You don't want to be going, like we said. Make sure you're getting that feedback through the strings, the angle that Phil was talking about, and that will really help us there. And the goal is to sound big and open. You're not trying to add more volume necessarily. Yes, It's all about opening out the sound. Yeah,
because you've got that limited headroom. So the electric guitar player can add on an extra overdrive. If you've got a modern keyboard player, they can add in an extra synth. They can go up that extra.
And they've got more. They can add harmonic quality on top. They can add another octave or whatever. You guys can shift.
Right.
Way out, and we can't do that. You've also got all your box of tricks down there.
I've got all the box of tricks.
Which we'll come back to. I do call them Phil's talent boosters. Talent boosters. I'm joking. That's not fair. That's not at all true.
But the temptation can be, can't it, from electric guitarists, the rest of the band are able to go that extra stage. Yeah. And so we want to go with them, but the guitar runs out of space. So what happens is you get that overstrumming, the strings and the tone becomes harsh. So that's why that feel thing you were talking about is really important, because when at our church, we're fortunate enough to have an in-ear monitoring system, but even in an in-ear monitoring system, when the band is loud, the acoustic guitar, doesn't matter how loud it is, just sonically it gets eaten. So you do rely on feeling the vibrations and what the guitar is telling you through that pick.
Yeah, that's helpful.
To know how well how much you're hitting it.
That's it. And then just kind of, so taking on board as well what Phil was saying there with the cage system, I'm just going to talk about voice leading for just a moment. The voice leading, think of it about it as what the top note, or actually sometimes the bottom note in the chord is doing, and you want it to follow a nice smooth pattern. It won't feel jumpy, it will feel like one continuous part. Now, the way we can do that, and why you do that is it just helps, it creates the kind of right style, sort of, you get that, it comes across nicely. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it affects where I put my capo. So when I'm leading, I'm not just using the capo to make life easier. It does sometimes do that, but actually I'm thinking about what the quality of the sound, and I'm thinking about how one chord can flow to the next in the progression. So my favorite groups of chords are G shapes and C shapes. So what I mean by that is, in the key of G, I'm using the G shape and the fifth, the sixth, the fourth of those. So in G, the fifth would be D, the fourth would be C, the sixth would be E minor because of your little rhyme.
Yeah.
And
do you want to just play those?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So G's here, D's here, that's the 5, the 6 is there, and the 4 is there, that's the C. And that just works nicely together. So you can do a little bit of voicing like this. So I'm actually going to keep my top 2 fingers more or less as an anchor there because it strings the chords together. But listen for the D chord because you'll hear the top note of the chord move down and then back up for the, or you could leave it off for the E. So here's the G, D, so that's the same progression you were using earlier. So, but you can do it in other ways as well. So here would be an example of voice leading with the bottom note of the chord. So this is in C shapes. So I'm going to give us C, I'm going to give us G with a B in the bass. This is for Behold Our God chorus. Then to the A minor, which is the 6th chord. And you'll hear the chords join together from the bottom end this time. So you kind of get that descending bass line. Now, I tend to avoid using the A shapes, the sort of family of chords, because I just find they don't sound as open and rich. It just feels a bit closed. So if I was in A, it just doesn't sound as good. Whereas if I put my capo on 2, I'll be in the same key, I'll be in A, but I'll use the G shapes and I get... It just sounds much richer. And so that's why I'm thinking about that. I sometimes use E shapes for particular things. They're more folky songs. So, you know, praise the Lord, His mercy. It's kind of that sound feels quite right. But otherwise, I'm using the cage system. I'm thinking, okay, where can I use the most open sounding, most pleasing sounding chords? And so for Behold Our God, you could do it in C shapes. You could do it in capo 5 with G shapes. So there's just a couple of thoughts about how to open out the sound. And for acoustic guitar players, it's really important because we're kind of keeping that engine room going. We're keeping the rhythmic pulse, keeping it going and locking with things. And that's one way how to do that in a pleasing way that strings those chords together, that feels open.
Yeah, and if you can spend time practicing, getting used to playing the same chord progression in the same key in a couple of different places using the capo, then you can audition which ones seem to work best for you. In a big band, maybe you need to be brighter. If it's smaller, maybe you want to be a little bit lower so your sound is a bit chunkier, so you can kind of start to make those decisions. Now, one thing I forgot to say, but actually lines up really nicely with what you're talking about there, is this is why just being able to learn our fretboard and understand how these chords fit together is just really useful, because when you're using the capo, if we've learned how to play chords out of a book, here's a fretboard diagram and here's the name of the chord. And on a lot of church music, helpfully, I want to say helpfully, in brackets will be the chord shape that you need and what capo position you need.
Yes.
But it's really, really good to just have a bit more autonomy over that. So if I'm playing in C with capo 5, even though my fingers are doing a G major shape, I'm not thinking G major, that's C, because everybody else is also, because that's the sound everyone's playing. If you say to the piano player, I'm playing G, they're gonna play an actual G. And then they go, oh no, I'm on capo 5. If they don't play guitar, they might not know what that means. So it's just really good, really helpful, and then you can be more creative and have that autonomy in making those decisions.
That's helpful,
as you say.
Yeah. So that's kind of focus on acoustic guitar. Do you want to take us into electric guitar, kind of focus of how you slot into a group?
Yes. So the electric guitar's main role in the majority of Christian music, in modern Christian music, is that it provides texture, color, and excitement to an arrangement. Those are kind of its primary roles. Now, I think one of the things that's difficult about coming to play electric guitar in a church setting, even though we might only be using, say, 4 chords, or maybe there's, maybe there's a bonus chord in there, chord 2 gets thrown in, so you've got 5 chords.
Occasionally,
pushing the boat out a little bit. But the music that we play in church is not guitar-centric, so the core minimal skill set that we need as electric guitar players to be able to play something that doesn't sound inoffensive and is useful is just more challenging than it is for the majority of other instruments, actually, to be fair. It just is quite hard work, because we need to know, because we want to know, well, where do all the notes live and how do I pick out a melody if I don't, that's a huge amount of work. That's really quite difficult. And then, okay, well, am I going to strum? What kind of sound am I going to use? Is it going to be overdrive? Is it going to be clean? Whereas if you've grown up playing rock music like I did, that is a guitar-centric style of music. So if you're playing Back in Black by AC/DC, which sounds really weird with my
with the reverb on.
With my pop ambient reverb, not stylistically appropriate at all. But the role of the guitar there is very straightforward. I'm playing power chords in open position with overdrive. That's the rhythm. I'm playing the riffs. I've got a solo. Job done. Nice and easy. But it is quite difficult to be able to find a way to slot in with this. So first thing I just want to talk about as well is thinking about how we can string some parts together. And a really big part of this is being aware of the impact of the controls of our guitar on the overall tone. Okay, now, as a general rule of thumb, when we're feeling a bit less confident, we're afraid of bright guitar sounds because they're very exposing and they're hard to control, and they feel, they feel like a wild animal in your hands. It's kind of a strange feeling. So we'll often go for something that sounds a bit thicker and a bit darker sounding. Now, the downside of that is it can create quite a thick, muddy sound that might work great in a trio setting or in a rock setting, but we want to have a very clear, crystal and open sound so that it blends nicely with the other instrumentation, and so that you kind of cut through in the mix as well.
Yes, because you don't want to muddy up an area that someone else is in.
Right. So what I want to show you is very quickly the difference in just using the pickup selection. So often our default is to go for the neck pickup. Now, I'm a big fan of the neck pickup in the right place, but it's often used as a bit of a comfort hiding place as well. So if I play one of the parts that we're going to go through in a minute. I'll put a bit of delay on. Okay, so that sounds nice and sweet. Okay, now if there's a lot of space, there's not a lot of other things going on, the drums and bass aren't really going particularly hard, then that sound will work really well. That'll sound really nice, especially with a bit of acoustic guitar underneath giving it a little bit of support. But the thing is, that's a very warm, round kind of sound. Now, in a loud section, that's not really going to cut through. So our temptation might be, I need more overdrive to make it sound more powerful. That's what I do if I play rock.
Yeah, stick it on in the chorus.
Yes, exactly. And most of us probably do play rock-orientated styles of guitar. So what that's going to do is make things sound a bit too intense, and it'll sound muddy. And the more overdrive you have, it gives the impression of being louder when it may not be, actually. Yes. So you can get away with having more volume if your sound is a bit cleaner, because it sounds less aggressive and less abrasive.
Yeah, if you don't want everyone to run to the back of the sound desk and tell them to turn you down.
That's it. So a sound guy might turn you down, not necessarily because you're too loud, but because the sound is too intense, it's too aggressive, it's not the right thing. So if I just go to the bridge pickup, we'll actually hear that it gives me this shifting gears. Now, it feels more exposed because you're going to hear and feel that top-end control be harder to tame. So, much brighter. I'm also going to just tune that D string as well. So. Okay, so you can hear immediately there's a lot more punch. You can hear as well, it's almost piano-like an attack because I'm not tickling those strings, as we were saying.
Yeah, it's
earlier.
really nice. Yeah.
So just a word just on your controls. Now, I do like to add just a tiny little bit of overdrive to thicken things up, but let me show you how barely noticeable that extra overdrive is. So here is the sound that I just used. Here's the extra bit of overdrive.
Yeah, it's making a difference, but it's not like crackling and...
It's not this.
Yeah. It's not that.
Which is huge. And it's a great sound,
Yeah.
but it's not going to be the most useful or appropriate sound for what I'm trying to do. Really, in this style, we have one core tone which we gently have slightly varying shades of, which most listeners probably won't notice, but it'll just be the right thing for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's really good.
In what you're doing. And it took me a very long time to learn how to do that, because it's not obvious, because the guitars are often so textural, it's very hard to discern what they sound like.
If you're listening to a recording of something.
Exactly. It's very difficult to reverse engineer these things. So that really is what's going on. So if you listen to a Hillsong record or any recordings of that style, there will be 4 or 5 different layers doing that type of thing, which is what gives it that big texture and that big broad sound. So, and on a Sunday, there's only one of us, so we're trying to sort of emulate that to a certain extent. So let me go into a couple of quick things, because we're running a bit later than we had intended. So let me fly through these. These are all in the handout. A couple of really useful types of voicings to use, okay, would be to use power chords in tenths. So think of that as a little bit like playing major chords, like your standard grip bar chords, but you're going to get rid of the note on the G string.
Okay.
So if I play with a bit of, on my bridge pickup here, it's quite a thick sound because you've got this in the middle, which is a very thick sound. Now, if I get rid of that, just have the root in the 5th, and then have the 3rd on the top, and a bit like when you play an open G, I'm just going to use the underside of that finger to mute that string.
Yeah, that's just much more open.
Much more open.
Right.
Now, it's great if I'm playing with a little bit of energy, because it will have the grunt of a power chord, but it'll have the brightness of that major 3rd in the top, keeping it sounding sweet. So then I can have something that sounds like this.
I've always wondered how you do that, so now we know.
That's how we do that. So that is a real game changer. And notice as well, I'm not afraid to just keep all of the shapes with the root on the A string, because what I'm also hearing is a very nice bit of voice leading that the chord shapes reveal of their own accord. I don't have to think too hard, which is great. I'm hearing that.
Yeah, it's a line, So you're literally, you've got that one shape there, and you're just moving it up to the right position on the fretboard.
That's it. Yeah. And if I was going to play that top line without the chords, I'd hear this.
Yeah.
So you can combine this as a chordal idea, or you can make it a single note idea. Okay, so that's the first thing. So playing in tenths, you can do the same thing with the root on the E string. Now on the E string, because it's thicker sounding strings, the 5th sounds muddy. So on the diagrams, you'll notice that I've shown it to you with 2 octaves, and then with the 3rd in, which sounds much clearer.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got that. And on the diagrams for the minor chord, I use a minor 7 voicing. Purely because it's easier to play, because I don't have to take this finger off.
Nice.
I could play it like this. It's just a bit awkward.
Actually, the version you did sounds better as well.
It is. It's more interesting, right?
It is,
Okay, nice and clean. But if I do it in 5ths, just because of how it resonates on the instrument, it sounds quite muddy. So it's fine here. It's nice and bright. here is a little bit too dark and muddy sounding.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing to look at.
And just as an acoustic guitar player sitting here, it's so helpful to see this, because like we'll come to exactly how these two fit together, but just that's so helpful for me to know, because I'm going, okay, if they're the kind of choices you're making. I mean, we've played together so much, we do this instinctively a little bit now, but actually the inner workings, that's so helpful for me, because I'm going to choose stuff that's going to complement that and not get in the way.
Yeah, brilliant. So I can't remember what number example it is. On the last page of your handout, there is a couple of different electric guitar approaches that I've tabbed out for you there, so you can take those away and study them. They are in the key and they will work for Behold Our God. But I'm just going to show you why knowing where your root notes are on the D string is really useful for a more contemporary kind of Christian sound. So a very common sound is to use these open power chords, but rather than sort of the rock power chords that we may have learned with the roots on the A string or playing the roots on the low E string, if I play it on the D string, and I know where that C is, nice and bright, there's space for keyboards, there's space for acoustic guitar, the bass is going to be filling in that low end. So, and again, a bit like with acoustic guitar, sometimes with electric guitar, we might have a big, full-sounding chorus, but I don't want to hammer the electric guitar. This is kind of an important thing as well. So you've got two examples on there. There's an arpeggiated version and a driving version. So I will always save the driving version if I've got a double chorus and it just needs to go up that extra notch. But increasingly, I'm playing more of these arpeggiated lines because they create brightness and sparkle in the mix. And it's the bass player and drummer who are bringing the energy. Actually. So what I'm going to do, and again, I'm sort of going to slightly follow your strumming pattern. So I'm listening to the leader's strumming pattern. Dun, kick, kick, snare, kick. Dun, dun, dun. Well, the other thing to say is the reason why the extra notes work is because they're just straight subdivisions within the grid. They're not funny triplets or anything that are going to sound like something totally different's going on. So I can emulate that, and this is the part that I have notated in the tab for you. Now you can do any variation on that you want to do. You can change around, it doesn't have to be that rigid, but that's just an example of the type of thing you can do. And that will work great in that sort of contemporary Christian thing. There's a couple of other examples on there which I won't go into because we're going to run out of time. So I will let you guys kind of dig into those. But I'm sure this will come up as a question. So I just want to talk very briefly before we glue it all together, just demo how these concepts come together, is how we can think of melodic lines, because this is something I know that people often ask me about, come for lessons for.
And just to say, please do chuck questions in the Q&A. We're going to have some good sort of chunk of time to go through some questions. So if you have any questions about any of this at all, or other guitar-related things, please just stick them in the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye on it, and we'll bring those questions in anyway. So, count.
Brill. So, first thing is, how can I know what type of thing I can play that's going to sound good? So, even if we know all of our pentatonic scale shapes, again, this is why being able to learn where the root note, at the very least, for the key that we're playing in across the whole fretboard, ideally you'd be able to see that for every chord if you can, which is much harder to do, takes a lot longer, but is doable if you practice it and put the time in. The question is, how do I know what to play? So sometimes I'll play something that's a correct note, but it sounds clunky. It kind of doesn't really fit. So for example, Ben, if you could just play the chorus chords for me, I'll show you an example of playing a correct note, but it just sounds clunky. It doesn't really fit. So if 2, 3, 4... Okay, right, so we've all been in that situation going, but there's a right note in the box. Okay,
Yeah.
so why doesn't it fit? It's because it's a tension note and not a note that belongs to the chord that you're actually playing over. Okay, now, most of the time, the pentatonic scale will work over every chord because all of those notes are contained in all the chords that are in the key, by and large.
So which notes would that be in C, say, in pentatonic scale?
So in C, so if we're playing C major pentatonic, all of these shapes, by the way, are in the handout. So if I'm playing C, if I play this shape, if you give me a C major chord,
Yeah.
now that line sounds pleasing to begin with because I've got the root note, which is the home.
Yeah.
D is a tension note, or it functions as the ninth, it's the second note, so it gives a sweet sound, it doesn't clash, okay? But then this note's the major third, the strongest, most pleasing sounding note, and then the note I finished on is the fifth, so it's reinforcing that, and your ear can tell that that sounds right. But let's say I finish on the A, if I'm thinking about the minor pentatonic box. So just strum a C major chord for me. Just give some rhythm.
Yeah.
Right, now the problem with that note is that note functions as the sixth over that chord.
And it's not in the chord underneath.
It's not in the chord we're playing. Stylistically, you'll find that in jazz.
Yeah.
Okay, but you won't get that in pop music because it's a weird clash. And also you can hear musically, melodically, it sounds like we're going into a new chord. So that's why it kind of clashes.
Yeah.
So what we want to be able to do with some practice using the diagrams in the handout is learn to be able to see which notes in that pentatonic scale are the root note, the major third and the fifth. Because then I can make an informed choice without guessing and hoping for the best.
Like have you seen on Instagram worship fail?
Yes, it's
always,
very entertaining.
It's always the guitarist playing a melody and guessing and getting it wrong.
100%. And I have been that guy many times. Trust me, like just going, oh my life, you know.
What am I supposed to do? Yeah.
And it can be very nerve-wracking. It can knock our confidence. So that's why this is really worth putting some time in. So if I know there's that C, and I know that's giving me the triad, there's my next C. I've got that sound. Now, I'll give you a little tip, okay? So in the key of C, there's a magic bonus note.
Ooh, tell me more.
That sounds brilliant over everything, okay? So generally, when you're playing your lines, if you're playing, we're playing in a major key, okay, I want to avoid the major six. This one. Okay, I can use it as a passing note as part of my melody, but I want to avoid that as a landing note.
Yeah.
Okay, but what I can add in is this note here, okay, which is the major seventh of C major. Okay, so that will give me an extended extended sound. Okay, so that note over chord 1 I can bounce off, gives me a really sweet tension and resolution because it's the major seventh. Okay, over chord 5, it's the major third of chord 5.
Yeah.
And then over chord 6, it's the ninth, so it will give me this dark minor 9 sound, but you'll naturally go.
Yeah.
Then you can play the A note, the major sixth from the key, because that's the chord that you're on, so then it can be there. Then over F, okay, that note is the sharp 11 interval. Okay, don't worry if you don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay, but that gives a really dark, sweet sound over the top as well. So if we go around that chorus just one more time, I'll demonstrate.
3, 4.
if I over-labour it, like I did that time, it gets tired very quickly. But I can use that as a substitution for this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
just the other thing,
oh,
it's just that in terms of congregation, like lots of people we're leading aren't musicians. If they feel like the note they're singing clashes with something you're doing, they're going to feel like they're wrong.
Yeah.
And having that pentatonic scale, the notes. I mean, you're probably going to avoid the congregation. You're probably not going to play a melody like that when the melody is being sung with the congregation. But in those moments where it's going to be cohesive with what they're doing, and so they're going to feel confident to sing.
100%. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is, and then we'll go to questions, is if you're not sure, well, how do I start with trying to play a melody? You'll notice I played very simple rhythms. Bum, ba, ba, dum, ba.
Yes.
Rhythmically, it was very simple.
Yes.
And I'm listening a lot. I rely on my ear a lot. So I'm not trying to. So I've done the academic work. I'm letting that run in the background. But if you don't know where to start, learn the melody of the song on the instrument. Usually, it is just a pentatonic scale, which is exactly the case in this one. So, behold, our God.
Yeah.
Seated on the throne. Exactly. Da, 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 da. Major 7, then back to the root.
And then just between those two, yeah.
And then that's it.
And if you're a songwriter, that's why that melody works, because it's simple, but particularly when we're creating parts around that.
Right. So I could take that idea and I could just embellish it. And this is where your articulations are really important, because if I just play it like I played it then, it doesn't sound very inspiring.
It's a bit choppy, if I'm honest.
It's a bit choppy, but if I do a little slide in...
There's a vibrato.
Slide up there, yeah, a little bit of vibrato. Okay, I can add in, if I know where F is, if I know where my root notes are on my G string, I implied the chord in the line to reinforce it. Now you can bounce off that using the notes in your pentatonic scale. And I'm using it as a springboard. And the ease with which that will come with the more you practice and the more familiar you become with the material.
Good. That's really good.
Let's move to questions, because
Let's move to questions. Well, a couple of great questions in already. So Ryan's asked, I'm in a small church with few experienced musicians and have often done music alone. Any tips for leading a congregation in song as a sole musician? Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for your service for your church. It's wonderful. The spiritual blessing that is to your church family is amazing. And especially if you've been doing this last year, it's hard work. So thank you for doing that, Ryan. I think a lot of the techniques that we've explored, particularly near the front end of the session, will translate really well into your context. So simple things like the way we grip the plectrum, getting the feedback through the arm. I don't know, Ryan, if you're an acoustic or electric player. I imagine you're probably an acoustic player if you're on your own, but maybe not. But the concept of internalising the pulse and choosing where your capo goes will really help you. I think when you're on your own, it's down to you to project the confidence as the leader to make the congregation feel secure. So those two aims we started with, supporting congregational singing and adorning the truth, like with music. I think confidence comes from the good technique. And so just mastering those sorts of things, keeping the pulse going, keeping it moving in your right hand, picking chords that are going to help the guitar sing in those different shapes, that will really help. And the two things, if you boil it right down, that the congregation needs, they need the pitch, where to start, and the pulse, how fast they go. And you can provide that all from your acoustic guitar and your voice. You don't need to have these, it's not sub-biblical if you don't have a whole band or anything. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to have. If you don't have that, that's absolutely fine. But these techniques will help you and there'll be lots of you like Ryan out there, I know. And
I think you could quickly show an example of something that you do really well when we do the weekends away. It's often just you, or maybe it's me and you playing acoustic guitars. But could you just show, just with you singing and playing acoustic guitar, here's a sparse rhythm to provide one sound for the verse, here's how I'll provide a new sound for the chorus, so we can musically hear, even just from your guitar, that we've gone to a new section, because this will be a really useful thing that you can try and use to help give your music a lot of dynamic variation, even when it's just you. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll just go from verse 3 of Behold Our God, because that's sort of down bit and it builds and it's great, isn't it? So, who has felt the nails upon... So a little bit picking here. Bearing all the guilt of sinful man. God eternal, humble. I'm still hearing that groove in my head, but I'm just picking, and then we'll build. G's downstroke, Saviour, risen now to reign. Into the groove. Behold our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore. If I wanted to go bigger, more strumming. Behold our King, nothing can compare. Come, let us adore. And then always go a cappella.
Always go a
Not like
cappella,
that, don't stop there. But I think just one thing to observe there, when I went bigger, rather than going, right, let's just hammer the strings, because of those, I was making sure the grip was nice and tight, feeling the vibrations through the arm, but also just adding more of the subdivisions in. And actually, Phil, one thing I've got to say earlier on this is, increasingly, with a band, I'm favouring, like, kind of downstrokes on the strong beats of the bar, because I don't need to do loads if there is more than just me, and that's not Ryan's situation, but just tightening the grip on those bigger strums, so it just sings, and then just retreating back. And if there's other stuff going on, that's really helpful. But Ryan, for you in a smaller church, those simple techniques will still bring the dynamic range. It'll help adorn the truth there, but also it will give confidence to your congregation to sing. So I hope that's helpful. Did you want to add anything? I've got a question for you about pedals. If not,
let's do a question about pedals.
Let's do it. So, question here: what effects or pedals are you using to get your default clean sound? It's a great sound.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And keep questions coming in.
Yeah, please keep them coming in, because we've still got a good more than 10 minutes, I think. So what I am using is, well, I wonder if I can hold the pedal up.
While you're getting it, and
there it is. So if I hold it up, we'll see it on the close-up cam.
Yeah.
It's upside down, sorry, I can't turn it the right way.
Is that about
around.
right, Dave? Higher, lower, you're happy? Great.
Yeah, so on here, this box at the end is made by a company called Two Notes Audio Engineering. Now, what this is it's a very, very good but very affordable. I think they're only about £200 or £250, which compared to something like a Helix or a Kemper or a Quad Cortex, which are all from £1,500 to £2,000, is actually a very, very cheap thing. So this is designed to... Basically, it's a very good capture of like a Fender Twin or a Fender Blackface, I think, which is a very good, clean-sounding amplifier. And then you can change what speakers and things, and you can slightly change the EQ. So I've sort of spent a bit of time messing around getting that to sound how I want it to. So that's my blank sort of amp canvas. Before I had this, we have a Blackstar HC5 in the box behind Ben with a mic on it, which is a valve amp, but it's cheap. I think it was like 250 quid when I first got it. You can get really good things like that.
But the great thing about these boxes is in terms of control and for your sound guys, if they're not used to guitars, like, this is great because it's just all in a box.
Yeah, if your church is using an in-ear system, which more and more churches are, if they're not, then you will definitely want an amp, obviously, otherwise you won't be able to really hear yourself. So the way that I set up the clean tone is I actually have an always-on overdrive. So I've got a D&M drive here. Those of you who know what that is will know what that is.
It's orange.
By Keeley Electronics.
If you don't know what it is, it's orange.
Essentially, the boost side is like a Tube Screamer style pedal. So what you do is you set the gain very low and turn the level up a little bit. Now, what that gives you is the sound of a very nice amplifier right on the edge of breakup, as if it was very loud. So if I turn, even if I turn the delay off, what you're hearing is a very... It sounds clean, but this is it clean.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which is great if I'm going to play funk.
Which we always do on Sunday.
Which we always do on a Sunday, right?
Not.
But if I do that with this boost pedal on,
yeah, okay.
you can hear there's crunch to it. It's louder because I'm pushing the front end a little bit more, but there's more character to it. So, and when I go to the bridge pickup, a louder pickup, you can hear it's almost overdriving. If I boost it a tiny bit more, you can hear it's not heavily overdriven, but it's a dirty, clean sound. So that's how to think about it. The other pedal that I've got here is a Majestic Overdrive by J-Rocket Audio, but really good, affordable pedals, that sound fantastic, that you can get second-hand for like 30, 40 quid on eBay.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Boss OD3, probably the best-kept secret, and then Boss BD Blues Driver as well. Let's move on, because we're going to run out of time.
I was just going to say, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but actually, a lot of the tone is coming from you. Right?
Yes, so it is,
actually, like, it doesn't look like a spaceship down here. There's a few, what you've seen it, but it's not. You've not spent £30 million on your board. Actually, a lot of it is the techniques that we've tried to share and hopefully have been helpful. That help to generate that as well.
Obviously, reverb and delay can't come out of your fingers, but the quality of your overall sound,
the core tone,
it actually does come from you and how you play. So don't think spending £300 on overdrive will solve your problems. Just practice more.
A few more questions have come in, which is brilliant. Let's try and bash through them all. Andre sent that question. Hi, Andre.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Alex says, do you have any tips for playing traditional hymns on guitar, i.e. playing complicated chords, how to adapt to a modern guitar-led style without ruining the song? Yeah, we face this all the time, don't we? I often take a lot of the chords out. So one thing we played with before when we were working this seminar out is, do we do something like Immortal Honours, which is, if you look at the chart, is literally like Immortal Honours rest on Jesus' head, because it's that style of music is driven by
piano based.
Well, yeah, it is, and it's exactly. But I would, just as an example, I would take the chords out with one of our Immortal Honours rest on Jesus' head. It's probably a little bit slow, isn't it? But you get the idea.
Because often the other chords in between are functioning as passing chords rather than part of the actual progression that kind of moves things along. So the thing, so that's one approach you can take. Now the other thing that I think is worth just mentioning, and this is a more advanced concept, but this is why having at least a basic knowledge of that harmonized major scale theory and knowing what all the chords in a key are and being able to hear and analyze those chord progressions is really important, is because those older hymns, or pretty much all of them, all use a device called secondary dominant, okay? So essentially, and we haven't had time to talk about inversions, which is a shame, but essentially what that means is a dominant chord just means it's a tension chord that resolves somewhere. So the most basic way of explaining that would be, let's do the key of C, because that's the song that we're in, and also there's no sharp to flat, so it's nice and easy, okay? So if I do this, if I do G sus4, and then resolve to C, it sounds like I've gone home, okay? So the fifth chord of the key is the dominant chord because it's the one that wants to pull your ear home. The reason for that is because the major third in that chord is the major seventh of the home key. So it's a leading note that pulls your ear back into chord one. Now you can pretend that any of the chords in the key are chord one in their own right and find the fifth of that chord and do a resolution in. So let's say I go to chord 2 of the key to D minor. I could do the fifth of D as A. So I could do a secondary dominant move into it like that. So in Immortal Honours, that's what happens.
Yeah. So the thing with if you get these complicated parts, I think that the two things I would say is even if if there's other musicians with you and they're playing all the chords, if you can probably simplify it down to probably one a bar in that way and on the strongest beats of the bar. The other thing I would say, from a strumming point of view, is they don't tend to work super well if I try and do a normal strumming pattern. And actually, the other techniques, the broken chords idea that Phil's explored a bit, Immortal Honours rest on Jesus' head. work quite well. The other thing is that that all downstrokes thing. I got my portion and my living bread.
So there we got. That was the secondary dominant there. So we heard it as an inversion.
Yeah.
So we went from E minor to E major in first inversion to move into that A, and you hear the melody move.
And when you simplify the chords, you do need those ones, because what you're actually doing is modulating to a new key. So you can't just go, well, I'll just go back to the 1, because it won't be the 1 anymore.
Yeah, because the melody has the note in the secondary dominant, doesn't it?
So my 2 big top tips are simplify the chords where you can. 1 a bar mostly works, I find. And then don't try and drive a strumming pattern through the middle of it. Work on these other techniques we've explored. Phil, I'm going to give you some quick-fire questions.
Quick-fire questions.
About 5 minutes left.
Great.
Okay, on acoustic guitar, any particular considerations regarding pick versus no pick for strumming?
Yes, in a band, always use a pick, because you get clarity of sound and you can better control the projection, unless you're a very proficient fingerstyle guitar player with longer nails and you know how to get a good sound.
Which I am not, so pick for me.
Neither am I, so I always use a pick.
It will cut. Okay, here's another question. How practically can we encourage people who can kind of play the guitar but don't have enough confidence to play with the music team to join? I would say get them to watch this and give them the handouts.
Yes, and I would say take some lessons.
Yeah, Phil is available for lessons.
You wouldn't. I am. It's not a sales pitch, but find a local teacher. If you know what to look for, there's lots of good stuff online. But find a teacher who can help you. None of us are above lessons. As I said earlier, I've been playing professionally for a long, long time now. I still go and get lessons with people.
Yeah, that's it. And the thing is, hopefully, it's certainly the way we try and do things at our church, and I know lots of other churches do this. We want to be committed to growing people and disciples and training them to use their gifts. So even if why not ask your music team if they can come along for a rehearsal and just be part of the rehearsal, and even if they don't play the service because they're not quite there yet, you'll learn tons. I've learned so much by playing with Phil and other musicians who are way better than I am. So there's a couple of things that might help. Another question from Barnabas here. As worship leaders, what would you say to someone who's still quite basic in their ability and how they can progress? I guess we've sort of just answered that, haven't we? With limited physical resources. You don't need all the bells and whistles and the pedals as you begin necessarily, because you want to work on your own core tone as a player, as much as they help.
Yeah, it depends whether you're talking about leading from guitar or from electric or from acoustic. But even from electric, the most basic thing that you need is one overdrive pedal and a delay pedal. That's it. You can do a whole thing on that. You'll have, you don't have as many options as other things, but it's doable.
We've got 2 minutes, so we've got to be even quicker now. Any tips for playing and singing at the same time? Yeah, you've got to practice loads. Once you've got the guitar feeling natural, once you're able to play those shapes without looking at your hands, work on playing rhythmically in a way that supports the melody, because that will serve everyone else as well. And you've just got to keep doing it.
Yeah,
it's a lot of practice. How would your electric guitar style change if you had no acoustic guitar in the band?
That's a very good question. I think that's more driven by the style of music rather than whether I've got an acoustic guitar player or not, to be honest. The only thing that might inform that is if, let's say, there's a down section, I think, do you know what, it would have been great if there was an acoustic player to kind of play the picking verse like you just did in verse 3.
And you might put that
so I might do that instead, and that will still work great. But if I've got an acoustic player doing that, we'll clash, so I'll let the acoustic player do that.
Yeah. Can you run us through some of the chords you're using on the acoustic guitar? So I was in C. I've just got my little finger on the top on the 3rd fret, and I'm using that as a bit of an anchor there. So my A minor chord, it's an A minor 7. I've taken that finger off, but from here. But I'm keep my little finger on. The F is a bit of a cheat. It's not a bar chord. I'm putting my thumb over my finger on top there. So rather than the classic, it's just a bit more open sounding. You can pause the screen on that one if you like. That's that one. In the key of G, I'm just keeping these 2 fingers down the whole time. And I'm getting a C add 9, technically. And I'm getting an E minor 7 add 9 as well. But that's just keeping those 2 fingers there. But you can go back and pause the video because the time is quite short. Are there any songwriters, musicians you would particularly recommend listening to for more examples of the techniques you've described? a lot of good recordings have this stuff on.
They do. I would check out, I've forgotten the chap's name, but he's an Australian guy. He plays in the main Hillsong praise and worship band.
Google, YouTube, Hillsong guitarist probably come up.
Yeah, he's quite a famous guy in those circles. I'm sure a bunch of you are shouting at the screen going, it's this dude, but it's just gone from my brain. He's got some great tutorials on stuff that he does.
We've got 4 questions and very little time. I'm going to try and get through them if we can.
Yeah, let's do it.
We've got a keys player in our midst. Thank you, Anne, for coming. Tried to build a sense of how guitarists work and think, so I can give more help in rehearsal. Any advice on how to go about this? Any definite do's or don'ts and what to expect from a player's skill or knowledge? It does depend on the player quite a lot, Anne, I think.
It does. Can I jump on that?
Yeah, please do.
So first thing is, good keyboard player and good electric guitar player will be listening to each other. So they'll be listening to each other for where they are in the register, whether one of you is going to play a right-hand motif, whether one of you isn't. A lot of the approaches musically that I'm doing on electric guitar with just arpeggiating through chords using simple subdivisions for the chordal sections is very much the same for a keyboard player as well. So if as a keyboard player you're playing the chorus of the song but you're also improvising a load of melody stuff, that would kind of be the equivalent of me as the guitar player whilst you're singing the chorus, me going it's going to be completely in the way. But I've heard lots of people do that, and a lot of piano players are very guilty of doing that type of thing. So again, you're kind of strumming at the equivalent. However you play it with hands, you might be going. You might add that, but it's all rhythmically orientated, and then you have a conversation. So, and if you're more confident with understanding how those things fit together, then you can give guidance to the guitar player in your band. Say, hey man, if you play this, I can do this, and we'll lock together.
So the key thing is listen to each other, listen to each other, listen to each other, and also then have a conversation about who's going to be where. I think that's absolutely vital. All right, very briefly, would you always recommend an acoustic guitar over an electric guitar if it's just you and keys? No, I don't think I would. I think what are you most comfortable at leading congregation? What are your congregation going to be served most by? And just whichever one you choose, just consider how you're going to best complement the other musician that you're playing with. Malcolm's asked, thanks for your service. Well, you're very welcome. Do we use paper music or tablets? Well, in the whole COVID thing, we've started using a bit more tablets, which has its downsides. You can't mark up the music. You learn differently to me, Phil, but I'm very much write it down and I'll be okay. And so I can't do that, which is a little bit annoying. But the key thing is what's most clear for you, because you don't want your head to be going, what chord is that? You want it to be going, Jesus is amazing, and I want to lead these people.
Yeah, I think moving to tablets is good if you have a general repertoire of music that you usually play all the time. Just try and commit some of that to memory. So you're not as reliant on the music.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the question we had about leading and playing and singing at the same time as well. Last question. Finn has asked, can you please repeat the info on the extra notes in the pentatonic chords like the major 7, or where are they in the notes? Have you got that in the notes, the pentatonic stuff?
They are. Let me briefly say. So there's 4 sets of fretboard diagrams. There's major pentatonic and minor pentatonic. If you look at those 2 fretboard diagrams next to each other, you'll see that the fretboard patterns are exactly the same, but depending on whether you're seeing it from the minor key, A minor, or whether you're seeing it from the relative major, the C major key, I have relabeled the intervals. So in the key of C, this is home, because this note is C. So this is root 2, 3, 6, major 7, back to the root. Sorry, not major, major 6, sorry, 5, major 6,
major 6, yeah.
back to the root. If it's the minor scale, it's root, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, root. Now there's 2 more diagrams called the major scale and the natural minor scale, which are the exact same shapes again, but I've put in the 2 notes that the pentatonic scale skips, which is note number 2 and note number 6.
Oh, yeah.
So the major scale will go root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, major 7, root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, major 7, root in all of the 5 positions. From the minor scale, this is now the root, because we're in the key, because home is the minor key. So this will now be the root, major second, the third, the flat 3, the fourth, the fifth, the flat 6, the flat 7, and then the octave. The 2, the flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and then the octave. Okay, so the pattern's exactly the same, but the function that the note has over the chord is different. That's why I've labelled it that way.
But you can find it in what you've...
But it's on those diagrams. Yeah, so study those diagrams. Yeah. If those diagrams are a little bit beyond you, then you can drop me an email if you want to book a lesson.
Yes. How do you do
that's
that?
not a sales pitch, but that's just a genuine...
Well,
if you really want help, I can help you with that.
Yeah.
So my email is my name, Phil, Phil, at philshort.com. You can drop me an email if that's interesting.
And I'm Ben at christchurchmayfair.org if you wanted to ask any more acoustic-related questions. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you've been served by that. Watch it again if things were too quick. Take those handouts away. I'm going to pray. And then get ready for the next talk. I've heard it's brilliant. I've heard wonderful things, so I'll let you go get a coffee. But let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for the joy of serving you in all of our lives, but particularly as we've been thinking about today as guitar players. Thank you that you've put us in congregations to serve, and that the gospel is so good that we want to sing it, we want to accompany it, we want to adorn it. I pray that the techniques we've explored today will help people who've been watching to serve their congregations better. And we pray that even starting tomorrow, as they tune up for church and rehearse, that these things will be helpful so that your people can find a voice, even in this weird time when we can't actually sing, but certainly beyond that when we can. And I pray that our church gatherings would come even more closely to just mirror those wonderful times in heaven we're going to have as we are so focused on the gospel and enjoying you and all that you are to us. We pray that these techniques would help us practically just do that. We pray for each of the churches represented here that you would help them to grow and to love the gospel more and to sing better. And we pray that these techniques would go a little tiny way to helping people do that. And we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us, and we'll enjoy the next session.